It all started the moment Denzel walked onto the studio stage. The lights dimmed, cameras rolled, and the host barely finished introducing him before the tension in the room shifted. Everyone knew tonight's discussion would center on Veterans Day, especially after Trump's chaotic public appearance had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. While social media exploded with memes and commentary, Denzel remained completely calm. He sat down, adjusted his jacket, and looked straight into the camera with the kind of seriousness that makes audiences instinctively lean closer. When asked about the incident, he didn't dodge, didn't soften the hit. He simply said, "A moment meant to honor sacrifice turned into something else, something messy, and that mess came right back at him." The room fell silent. Even the host hesitated before asking the next question. Denzel wasn't attacking, he wasn't mocking. He was describing what millions of viewers had already seen for themselves. And somehow, the truth landed harder than any insult could. The clip of that single sentence hit the internet like wildfire. By the next morning, Denzel's comment had already been replayed millions of times. Headlines popped up everywhere: Denzel breaks down the chaos, veterans deserve better, backlash explodes after the ceremony. It felt like the entire political world suddenly shifted its focus toward the debate he ignited without even raising his voice. Producers invited him to a primetime roundtable, pairing him with commentators known for defending Trump at every turn. Denzel agreed, not for drama, but because he believed the topic mattered. When he walked into that studio, the panelists expected him to backtrack or soften his tone. Instead, he calmly repeated his stance. Veterans Day isn't supposed to be about politics. When the moment goes off the rails, the consequences come back fast. The simplicity of it rattled them. One panelist tried to spin the incident as exaggerated online hysteria, but Denzel didn't budge. He looked directly at him and said, "The footage speaks louder than any narrative." His poise made the debate impossible to control, and impossible to ignore. That night, the confrontation everyone anticipated finally arrived. Trump himself called into the network during the live broadcast, clearly irritated by the attention Denzel's remarks were attracting. The atmosphere instantly tightened, even the host looked caught off guard. Trump launched into a defense of the event, insisting the backlash was unfair and fueled by media distortion. Denzel didn't interrupt. He didn't roll his eyes. He waited. When the host finally gave him the floor, Denzel spoke with steady precision: "Veterans deserve focus, not noise. If the day becomes overshadowed, then yes, people react. And when people react, the moment backfires." Trump tried to push back, raising his voice, but Denzel didn't raise his. The contrast was jarring. The audience could feel the shift, one man emotionally spiraling, the other unshaken. Twitter erupted instantly: "Denzel stays calm while Trump loses it, this is a masterclass in pressure." The moment became the spark for the showdown no one expected but everyone watched. The fallout from the live clash didn't fade, it detonated. By sunrise, Denzel's calm, razor-sharp responses were everywhere: TikTok edits, YouTube breakdowns, political podcasts quoting him word for word. What grabbed people wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. No shouting, no theatrics, no punchline delivery. Just steady clarity in the middle of someone else's storm. Commentators from both sides analyzed the same 5-second moment. Trump freezing, realizing Denzel wasn't taking the bait, wasn't getting dragged into the noise. That freeze frame became the screenshot of the day. When Denzel returned to the studio for a follow-up segment, the host asked whether he expected the exchange to explode online. Denzel shook his head. "All I did was keep my balance," he said. "If someone loses theirs, that's on them." The panel went silent again, because the truth in that line hit harder than any direct attack. It wasn't confrontational, it was factual, and that made it sting. Audiences reacted instantly, flooding the chat with comments about how rare it was to see someone stay composed under that kind of pressure. Denzel didn't celebrate it, didn't gloat. He simply leaned forward and added, Veterans Day should have been about veterans. When the focus shifts, the consequences show up fast. That final sentence, clean, controlled, undeniable, went more viral than the argument itself. By Monday morning, the fallout had a body count, political, not physical. Pollsters released overnight numbers showing a sharp drop in support among veterans and their families. Scroll after scroll, there it was, grainy phone videos from Arlington, captions like, "He made it about himself," and "We deserved better than this." On cable news, surrogates tried to spin the ceremony as misunderstood patriotism, but the footage didn't care about spin. It just replayed, over and over. The rambling speech, the awkward smirk, the moment the crowd refused to clap. Denzel watched the coverage from a quiet corner of the studio cafe, hoodie up, reading everything, not out of vanity, but because he knew something deeper was moving underneath the headlines. A young production assistant approached, clutching her phone like it was glowing. "My dad served in Iraq," she said, voice a little shaky. "He never talks about politics. But he sent me your clip last night and just wrote, 'Finally, someone said it.'" Denzel didn't smile. He just nodded, the weight of that sentence settling on his shoulders. "Tell your dad I said thank you," he replied. "And that the mix is anytime he wants it." Meanwhile, on social media, the narrative began to flip. What started as "Denzel slams Trump" evolved into something else. Threads about how veterans are used as backdrops, how patriotism gets turned into a shield for bad behavior. People shared stories of botched benefits, long waits at the VA, folded flags handed to families who never got straight answers. And layered underneath every post was the same clip, Denzel, calm and unshaken, saying, "If you're going to use veterans as a stage, you'd better show up like you mean it." It wasn't just a sound bite anymore. It was a standard. The network didn't expect what happened next. Ratings from the Denzel-Trump clash were so high that every major channel wanted a Veterans Day special the following week. One network went a step further. They invited Denzel back, this time not as part of a panel, but face-to-face across from a senior Trump ally who was known for never backing down. The set was different tonight. Darker. More serious. No flashy graphics, just a long desk, 2 chairs, and a giant American flag softly lit behind them. The host opened the show with a recap of the Veterans Day event, the awkward remarks, the scattered boos, the confused veteran standing in the background, not sure whether to clap or walk away. Then they cut to Denzel. He didn't waste time. "Let's be clear," he said. "Honoring veterans isn't complicated. You show up, you respect the moment, you make it about them, not yourself. When that doesn't happen, people notice." And this time, they didn't just notice. They reacted. Trump's ally jumped in immediately. "You're exaggerating," he said. "The media cherry-picked a few bad angles. Most veterans support him." Denzel raised an eyebrow. "So why," he asked calmly, "did so many of them feel disappointed enough to say it on camera? Were they cherry-picked too? Or are we finally hearing what's been true for a long time?" The studio audience hummed, caught between defense and agreement. The ally tried to redirect. "You're an actor. You're used to drama. You're turning a small slip into a crisis." Denzel didn't blink. "No," he replied. "I'm taking veterans seriously. That's the difference." That line landed hard. On social media, viewers clipped it instantly, stitching it with footage from the ceremony. The narrative kept shifting, moving away from, "Is this overblown?" toward a more uncomfortable question, "Why does this keep happening?" And every time someone asked that, Denzel's sentence played again. "If you use them as props, don't be surprised when the scene backfires." By midweek, the pressure cooker finally burst. Multiple veterans organizations released coordinated statements, measured, polite on the surface, but unmistakably critical in tone. They didn't name Trump directly, but every sentence carried the same message: the ceremony failed its purpose. Reporters rushed to get reactions, and every camera eventually swung toward the one person who had already said out loud what everyone else was tiptoeing around: Denzel. That's when the network booked a primetime town hall. Not a debate, not a panel, an open-floor confrontation where audience members could ask questions directly. Denzel agreed, but only on one condition: veterans themselves would fill the front row. Trump's team sent a representative again, but this time it wasn't a firebrand. It was someone carefully trained to soften the blow, someone who would try to reset the narrative with polished talking points. The moment the lights came up, though, it was obvious none of that was going to work. A retired Marine stood first. "I buried friends," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "Veterans Day isn't a campaign stop. Whoever steps onto that stage needs to get that." He didn't raise his voice, didn't spit anger, he didn't need to. His steadiness carried more weight than shouting ever could. The representative shifted uncomfortably. "We respect veterans more than anyone," he said. "The media twists." Denzel leaned forward. "No one here is talking about the media," he said, cutting cleanly through the excuse. "They're talking about how they felt. There's a difference." A murmur rippled through the studio. Another veteran spoke. Then another. No rants, no theatrics, just disappointment turned into sentences. And every time the representative tried to pivot, Denzel brought it back with surgical precision. "You heard them," he said calmly. "Not edited, not filtered. So tell them, here and now. Do you think they're wrong? Or do you think they're finally being heard?" The representative hesitated, too long. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers watched in real time as control slipped from his hands. And that hesitation became the clip of the night. A moment of silence that said more than any defense ever could. The fallout from that hesitation didn't take hours, it took minutes. The clip spread across social media like wildfire. The veteran speaking with quiet authority, the representative fumbling, and Denzel sitting perfectly still, eyes locked forward like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Comment sections exploded. Hashtags trended. Even networks that normally avoided the story began airing the segment on loop. By the next evening, the studio was packed again, this time for a scheduled interview that suddenly felt like a national emergency broadcast. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and Denzel walked onto the stage with the same calm energy he'd carried all week. But something in the air was different. The nation wasn't just listening anymore, it was demanding answers. The moderator opened with the simplest question imaginable: "Denzel, why do you think the Veterans Day backlash hit this hard?" He didn't pause. "Because people felt disrespected," he said. "You can disagree about policies. You can argue about numbers. But when the people who served feel dismissed, that crosses a line." And this time, somebody crossed it on camera. The audience murmured in agreement. Then, unexpectedly, the network announced that Trump's team had agreed to send a second representative, a more aggressive one, hoping to regain control of the narrative. He marched onto the stage with a stack of papers and a rehearsed confidence that immediately clashed with the room's energy. He tried to flip the script. "All this outrage is manufactured. Nobody is actually offended. This is political theater." A veteran in the audience let out a bitter laugh. Denzel turned toward the representative, expression unblinking. "You're calling them actors," he said, voice low but razor sharp. "Men who buried brothers? Women who patched up soldiers under fire? That's your defense?" The representative opened his mouth, found no words, then tried again. "We're saying the situation is exaggerated." Denzel leaned in just enough to shift the atmosphere. "If you think their hurt is an exaggeration, then you don't deserve to speak on their behalf." The studio erupted. Not in chaos, but in a heavy, electric silence that felt like judgment being passed. The representative froze, suddenly aware that every camera in the room was capturing a moment that would define the rest of the night. And maybe the rest of the story. The representative's silence wasn't just awkward, it was catastrophic. Millions were watching, waiting for him to salvage the moment, to offer something resembling a defense. But nothing came. His eyes darted toward the cameras, then toward the moderator, then finally toward the audience, where the veterans sat stone-faced. Every second of hesitation was a nail in the coffin of Trump's Veterans Day messaging. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply straightened in his chair like a man who understood the gravity of what had just shifted. "This isn't about politics," he said, voice steady, "this is about human respect. You can fix a policy. But once you show people who you really are, that's permanent." The representative forced a thin smile. "You're twisting his intentions. The president has always supported the troops." Denzel shook his head slowly. "Support isn't a slogan. Support is how you act when the cameras aren't on you. Support is whether you listen when veterans speak, especially when they're criticizing you." The audience snapped into applause, sharp, quick, unfiltered. The representative tried to regain control, flipping through his papers with trembling hands. "Look, we have internal memos. Reports. Data that show." Denzel cut in. "Data doesn't fix disrespect. And no memo is going to erase what millions saw with their own eyes." The moderator leaned forward. "So, Denzel, what do you think happens next?" He exhaled, gaze steady. "People are waking up. When veterans speak, America listens. And right now? America is hearing something it can't ignore." The representative finally snapped. "This is all media manipulation. Outrage for ratings. Manufactured drama." The audience booed, not loud, but deep, like the sound of disappointment more than anger. The veterans didn't yell, they just stared him down, and somehow that was worse. Denzel waited for the noise to settle. "Nobody forced this moment," he said quietly. "You walked into it. And then." Right when everyone thought it couldn't escalate further, the studio producer signaled that a live call was coming in. The entire room turned toward the giant monitor lighting up on stage. The name on the screen made the audience gasp. "Donald J. Trump, live feed request." The last thread of comm snapped. Everything was about to blow open, the studio went dead silent as Trump's name flashed across the giant screen. Even the air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. The moderator blinked twice, unsure if the control room was playing a prank or if the former president really decided to walk straight into the fire. "Patch him through," the producer's voice crackled in the moderator's earpiece. And then, Trump appeared. Live. Full screen. Jaw clenched. Eyes burning with the frustration of a man who finally realized the narrative had spiraled beyond his control. Behind him, the room he sat in looked chaotic, staff whispering urgently, someone waving a stack of papers out of frame. He didn't wait for introductions. "So this is what we're doing now?" Trump snapped. "Fake outrage? Fake news? Actors lecturing America about Veterans Day?" The audience gasped, half in shock, half in anticipation. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned in a little, elbows on the table, posture unshakably calm. "You want to talk directly, Donald? All right. Let's talk." Trump scoffed. "You don't know the first thing about honoring veterans." Denzel's eyes sharpened. "I know respect. And I know what disrespect looks like when it's broadcast to millions." Trump tried to speak again, but the moderator cut in. "Mr. Trump, are you denying the statements that went viral?" "I'm denying this circus," he barked, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. "The veterans love me. Everybody knows that. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the veterans in the audience stood up. An older man, medals pinned across his chest, posture stiff with decades of discipline. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply said, "Sir, we're tired of being props." The room froze. Trump blinked, stunned. Denzel turned toward the vet and nodded with deep respect. That's the truth right there. Not scripted. Not political. Just truth. The camera split-screened Trump and the veteran. Trump's face tightened. He wasn't used to this kind of confrontation, one he couldn't control or spin. "You're twisting everything," Trump shouted. "This whole thing backfired because you people love drama." Denzel stood up slowly. Calm. Controlled. Powerful. "No, Donald," he said. "It backfired because people finally saw past the show." The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in a unified, thunderous wave of applause. Trump's feed flickered, staff behind him scrambling, someone whispering frantically, "End the call. End it now." And just like that, his screen went black. Denzel sat back down, let out a quiet breath, and said, "Truth survives pressure. Propaganda doesn't." The studio lights dimmed as the show went to break, but one thing was already clear. Veterans Day would never be the same, because the lie had cracked on live television, and America had watched it shatter. Veterans don't ask for much: honesty, respect, and leaders who show up with more than a slogan. Last night, the country watched what happens when those simple expectations collide with ego. Veterans Day wasn't supposed to be about him, but he made it that way, and it backfired in front of millions. Tonight wasn't about proving who's right. It was about reminding America who deserves better. And if this moment taught us anything, it's this. You can spin politics, but you can't spin the truth in a veteran's eyes. Thanks for watching. Stay aware. Stay grounded. And always stand with those who served.